Okay, so let's start with some basic styling. First, in our front-end folder, we have a file called main.sas, and here let's start this by saying we want to customize Bulma, and I just prepared some color values which we want to use, and here I want, as a primary color, I want to use red, and as the invert color I want to use turquoise. And then what we also want to do is we want to have our own fonts. So I bought fonts here, and in our frontend folder let's make a subfolder called fonts, copy them there, and now in that fonts folder we find some CSS. So we have our fonts now, and what we also want to do here is that as a default font we want to add this font as first. Let's open it in the browser. Voila, and we have our font. That's great. So, and now that we have the configurations here, what we want to do is as a font face, we want to add it right and reload it. Okay, and we have now our font. You can check it here. It uses Zeitung Mono Pro. Okay, so right now we don't have any design. So let's go to Bulma, and here, if I go in the documentation, there are components, and there's one component called navigation bar. And we want to use that to build up a navigation bar. So you'll see here there's some sample code, and let's just copy that. And we want to go into the header. We have a header fusion, and the easiest one, just let's copy that in right now here. Okay, so let's save, and we go to the page. And there's one difference between EFX and an HTML, and it is that EFX is XML based, so it always needs to have closing, needs to close every tag. So I think that was it. Let's try it again. Cool, so now we have a header here, and you see it starts to look a bit like Vienna.js, but not really. So the first thing, we don't need a navigation bar on the right side, and we also do not need a two-level navigation, so I just want to render the first level of navigation. So it could look something like this, and here now we want to link here to our homepage, and here we want to link to our own logo. So what we're going to do here is actually we have an icon. Let's create a new folder here, and we'll call that image, and there we include a Vienna.js logo. And now we want to reference that here. So let's create a logo URI as a props, and here we want to use neos.fusion and resource URI. Okay, and as a path, we first need to point to our package. So we want to have a resource from our package. So that's something you'll have to get used to writing. And when you're now inside that package, we want to go to the public folder and front end, image, and then the logo name. And now we can use this here as props. And as an alternative, we just want to show here Vienna.js. and we want to adopt that height to our logo size. Great. So now, if we load it again, let's see how it looks. And you can see that the path is wrong. So what do we have here? We don't have a source. So there's a typo. You probably have seen that. And now we have our logo. All right, so that starts to become something. So of course, this navigation should not be manually entered here, but we want to make sure that it's built up. So one thing we could actually do is to put all of that into a header. That makes sense. Okay, we get rid of the brand name here, and we want to use that navigation rendering, but we want to have that inside here. And so this one here should be created by our navigation. So let's take a look at the navigation rendering, Fusion, components, navigation. And here our navigation, you see this one here does not work with AFX. That is just plain Fusion, so that's probably a bit hard to grasp in the beginning, but it's good for you to see. So this one here inherits from a value. So that basically just renders out to a string, and the value here is a tag. Why do we need that? We need that so we can get the site context and add some render caching, which will go into later steps. So this means you can define at what times the cache should be busted, because each Fusion object can be cached separately, which gives you a huge gain in rendering performance. So it renders a tag with the class name code QSite navigation, and the default type for a tag is div. So this is similar to what we have here. What we just want to add this ID here. So in Fusion, if you have an object like this, you do this curly brackets here, and then you can add properties. And this one here is exactly the same as this one here. So in one case, we are just saying follow this dots down, and in another case, we are opening it up and can set multiple values at the same time. Both are valid, and you could even do stuff like this now. And so we want to call this navigation, or let's call it main navigation. And as a class, we want to use navbar menu. I want to take that from here. And then we want to render another div inside. And then inside those, we want to render the links. So let's see how it currently looks. If I click on how the menu is rendered right now, here you see it rendered the navigation before, and then inside that it renders the links. So what we can do here is, so let's not do this here, instead just render this div here. So we copy paste that here, and now put that component in here. Okay, so the goal is that the navigation just renders this enough start here, and after that it will render the items. So the content is what the level renderer does. The reason why these are multiple files is that it cannot only render one level of navigation, but an infinite amount of levels. So you see the title here is rendered as an item, navigation item, and then it goes to the next level by rendering another collection of sub items. And this is nothing we need right now. So here is the actual rendering of the specific item. It sets a tag. So let me show you in contrast. This is how Bulma expects it. We just need the class set correctly. So here the class is an array. So raw array means that it's so this one is an array of all those values merged, and it's then merged together. So we're setting a base class, and this one is navigation item, and I replace that simply by saying navbar item. And then it will add a level and is current, and this is current, of course, is only rendered if it is current, and the way to check that is via Fusion. So we're checking if the node, the element we're currently rendering, is equal to the document node, the page we're currently on. And then we have is active, and it's active if the current document is either the site, so that's the root, and the current node is the document node, or if it's somewhere down the path. So this would basically build up a trail of breadcrumbs. Let's restart. And now we have VNHS, and we have our main navigation, and we can go through them. And yeah, so the next thing I would like to have is I would like to have a big teaser here. So, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this navigation here on touch devices gets a hamburger icon, and so we need to copy some JavaScript from here, because JavaScript is by default not included in Bulma. Okay, so let's just take this code here, and we have a file in the public folder, which is lib is the generated one, and this one here. Okay, so let's just write here responsive menu implementation. See also, let's add the link here. And now if we reload it and we click, we can open and close the menu. Perfect. So now our header is already finished. Okay, so the last thing which is still missing is we don't have footer yet. So, or the footer doesn't look like a footer yet. So if we again go to Bulma, we'll find a very simple footer, and we can go now here in our footer Fusion, and let's just edit first here, and again let's reindent. Okay, and we want to give it an extra class called Viviana.js footer. That's great. And now as a content, of course we don't want to have this, and we want to use the footer information. And you see it would also by default add some footer items. We're not going to use those. And we have the year, so that's cool. But let's change this to now 2017, because that's when the website first was started, till the current year. And then we have our extra footer information. And you can see here, that's something you should already be able to recognize. We're defining the year as a props for here. And here we're using EEL, and we use the date format function, which you'll find in the EEL helper reference. And there we're using date now, and we're just using the year. So we're getting the year in a four digit format from date now. Okay, and when we now apply this Bulma footer, it will look like this. And what I really would like now is to change the color. So we need some custom CSS. And of course, we want to get rid of that here. So you remember before we said that we want to have Fusion objects always in a separate folder. And the reason for that is that it's really nice to have the CSS and JavaScript co-located. So right now here in our main.js, we have a lot of stuff in our main.js. We can also just include additional stuff here at the bottom. So components, and then we say add import, and here we want to reference back to our footer component. So we need to step out once. So we're in the frontend folder, and another time to go into public, another time to go into the resources folder, and now we want to go into private Fusion component footer, and we want to include footer as CSS. And now here we want to create a second file which we call footer as CSS, where we take the name of the footer and give it a background of red. You remember this variable, we find it here. And then we want to have as a color white, and let's see how that looks. And now let's look, and we see here there's a error for building the SAS, and I can see I mistyped private here. So private, and let's see, now it renders. Okay, and let's add some spacing. Let's use RAM here. So this is not applied. Let's see. Oh yeah, so what's going on here is that the listener only listens for changes in our SAS folder. So we need to adopt that. So here, if you're watching, we need to add a second flag which says recursive. That means it will recursively watch. And now we define to which folder it needs to look. And here we just copy that part. So it should watch our Fusion folder as well. And now it will give you an error because this file here will try to render separately, and we have a variable here, and so it doesn't work. So all our SAS files need to start with underscore now, and that underscore means that this is not rendered as a separate file, but just as a helper file. And we can even get rid of that. And SAS automatically looks for files with and without the underscore here. So now everything is building, okay. And now let's try it. If I click save here, it recognizes and saves it. And if I'm in the footer and click save, it recognizes and saves. So now we have the margin top, and now that looks better. Okay, so what we could do next is we already have an existing text block here. Why not style that? So we can find a container here, which just looks like this. And so let's just take a container here. And so we go into content, text, and we have here our text. And we want to add here Vienna.js text and container. And now let's see. Right, so now this is in a box which has a max width, as you can see, but I think it needs some padding at the top and at the bottom. So let's add those. And as you have seen before, we want to create here a new file which we call underscore text.sass. And for that, I'm going to get this container here and give it some padding bottom, a margin bottom of 1 rem. And I would also like to have that the paragraphs or inside have some margin bottom of 1 rem, let's say 0.8. Oh, and of course we need to add this one here to main. So content node types, and that is content text. Oh, we have an error here. What did I edited the wrong file. You probably have seen that. Let's fix that. And now it renders, and it does not have the spacing yet, because that of course failed as well. And voila. Cool. So you see again the headline here. It looks really badly designed. But technically there's not really a difference between a headline element and a text element in the current implementation. It's just a few examples for starting us with a new skeleton. So what we could do is just change that to a text element. And enter the content again here. Okay, so now I reload it so we have the correct styling. And we could also give the buttons a nicer style. So let's go into the code again, and here we have our button. Now we're using this class right now, which is our custom class, but let's use a Bulma class called button, and let's use the color primary, which is our red. And then also right now there are just separate elements here which go after each other, maybe with some text also. I would like to have a separate raw for each of them and to be in a normal content flow. To achieve that, let's wrap them in a div with the Bulma class container, and maybe we want to style it later again with some additional styles. So let's add a Vienna.js button class, which we could use later as well. And now let's see how this looks like. Okay, so we definitely need some spacing here, and this turquoise, which is the primary invert, looks really bad. So in the beginning, we define a primary of red and an invert of this one, which I don't like. Let's use white instead. And now, similar to how we did it with text, now here I would like to have another SCSS file which has this class here. Okay, so now we have our own sus file, and here we want to add a margin bottom of a bit less than 1 rem. Let's see how this looks, and voila. And one last Bulma specific thing is we have already headlines here, as you maybe remember from entering here, but they're not shown as a headline. And the reason for that is that Bulma wants you to add the content class, and then it applies default content styling. So we'll do that in Fusion as well. So we go to here. No, our button doesn't need it. Our headlines is actually something we can get rid of. We don't need a headline. We discussed that because it's just like a text. So here we want to have content, and we then also remove the headline here. Okay, and now let's see it in the browser. Right, and we have some additional styling, and that means we can get rid of this one here. So when we now go back to the main file, this is actually quite long, and it's because of these font configurations. So let's just import the fonts. And let's say import, and let's just create a new file which we call fonts. And it, of course, it starts with underscore again, and it just first defines the font faces here, and then in the end sets the font. And this is what we can remove now, and so that actually looks way cleaner. So let's just make sure that everything still works. Perfect. So I think actually we got a really good looking website in a quite short time frame. So I'm pretty happy, and in the next steps we'll add some more features.